For 12 years, my husband and I celebrated every single anniversary in the same room at the same small hotel room, 214, the one with the window seat overlooking the courtyard, the one we picked on our honeymoon, because it felt like ours. Then on our 13th anniversary, the woman at the front desk smiled at me, checked her screen, and said, "Welcome back, Mrs. Calloway. It's always lovely to see the second one of you." I laughed, assuming she'd misspoken. She hadn't. And by the time I understood exactly what she meant, I'd already spent 12 years building the one kind of proof my husband never thought a hotel loyalty account could produce. If you've ever had a stranger say one sentence that quietly rewrote your entire marriage, stay with me for this one. And if stories like this get you, hit subscribe because there's a lot more where this came from. My name is Camille, and I manage corporate travel and loyalty accounts for a mid-sized consulting firm, the kind of job where I track hotel bookings, points, and reservation histories across dozens of properties for a living. I met my husband Julian 14 years ago, married him 2 years in, and for most of our marriage, our anniversary trip to the Wintergate Inn was the one tradition I never once thought to question. I've spent 11 years managing corporate travel accounts, which means I spend my working life inside reservation systems. Most people never think twice about loyalty tiers, booking histories, room preferences, logged property by property, the quiet architecture behind every welcome back a hotel desk clerk offers a returning guest. It's not glamorous work. It's precise. And precision was the one thing I trusted completely in my job, and I believed in my marriage. Julian worked as a regional sales director for a medical equipment company, a job with a fair amount of travel built in, though never anything that felt unusual for the industry. We picked the Wintergate Inn for our honeymoon, almost by accident, a small boutique property 2 hours outside the city that neither of us had heard of before a friend recommended it. Room 214 had a window seat we both fell in love with instantly. And by the end of that first stay, we'd already decided, half joking, that we'd come back every year. We did. 12 years running, same week in October, same room whenever the hotel could manage it. I set up our reservations myself almost every year, partly out of habit, partly because managing bookings was simply what I was good at. I opened a small loyalty account under my own name early on, the kind hotels offer frequent guests, mostly for the discount. Though I also liked, in a professional habit sort of way, having a clean record of every stay date's room number, rate, confirmation number. I never imagined I was building anything except a pleasant paper trail of a happy marriage. Every October, the ritual stayed the same. Julian would surprise me with the exact dates a few weeks ahead, always framing it as though he'd planned some elaborate secret, though I suspected warmly that the hotel's own booking confirmations landed in our shared email inbox well before he ever said a word. It felt like the kind of small devotion that holds a marriage together, one recurring reservation at a time. I planted one habit that year without meaning to plant anything at all. Because loyalty points accumulate slowly, I kept a running spreadsheet for my own account, tracking each stay's dates and confirmation numbers against my point, balanced the same kind of tracking I did professionally for clients. It was tedious, unglamorous bookkeeping. It sat quietly in a folder on my laptop for over a decade, waiting for a version of me who'd know exactly what to do with it. The anniversary trips became the single most predictable, most cherished fixture of our marriage. Same week in October, same drive out to the Wintergate, the same window seat waiting for us every single year. I never questioned the consistency. If anything, I treasured it the way you treasure the few things in a marriage that never seem to wobble. What I didn't notice, because I had no reason to look, was how often Julian's work travel started drifting toward that same small town throughout the rest of the year. A client visit here, a conference there, always somewhere within an hour of the Wintergate, always explained easily enough that I never thought to map the pattern out. His territory covered that whole region after all. It made sense that he'd pass through often. The first crack came from his colleague Renata at a company holiday party 6 years into the ritual. She raised her glass toward Julian and said, grinning, "To the only guy on the team who somehow always finds a reason to swing through Wintergate County twice a quarter. Must be good barbecue out there." Julian laughed it off best client relationships in my whole territory and moved the conversation along fast enough that I filed the comment away without examining it. The second crack came from Julian's mother, Denise, who I'd always gotten along with, well, though never with any particular closeness. About 8 years in, she started asking me during our occasional calls oddly specific questions whether Julian and I always used the same hotel for our anniversary, whether I ever booked those trips myself, whether I'd ever met anyone else who stayed there regularly. I told her it was just our tradition, nothing more, and she'd go quiet a beat too long before agreeing in a tone that never quite matched her words. The third crack was the loudest, and I nearly let it pass anyway. At a work conference, I ran into a woman named Priya, who managed loyalty partnerships for a regional hotel group, and when I mentioned casually that the Wintergate Inn was practically a second home to my husband and me, she tilted her head and said, "Funny, that's one of the properties I handle disputes for. We had a billing question there last spring, a Callaway account actually. Common name, I figured. I laughed it off as coincidence. It wasn't until I was driving home that the sentence fully landed. A Callaway account at our hotel that wasn't the one I managed myself. That night, I asked Julian as casually as I could manage whether he'd ever booked a stay at the Wintergate under his own name without me. He didn't miss a beat. Sometimes for work dinners nearby, sure, he said. Different account, different purpose. Nothing worth mentioning. Flat, fast, airtight the way only a lie you've rehearsed can sound. I let it sit for 2 more weeks before I brought it up again more directly this time, asking if I could pull up the hotel's guest history myself, just out of professional curiosity, to see how our own loyalty tier compared to other frequent guests. Julian's face did something I'd never seen it do before, real alarm gone almost as fast as it appeared. "That's not really something they'd let you access," he said. Then quieter, almost like a warning dressed up as a joke. "You worry about your spreadsheets. Let me worry about my territory." It was the first time in 12 years he'd ever drawn that particular line, and I remember standing in our kitchen feeling the floor tilt slightly, even though I couldn't yet say why. 3 days later, a hotel loyalty newsletter meant for a different account landed in my inbox by mistake, after what the email later explained was a database merge error during a system migration. It was addressed to Mrs. J. Callaway, listing a points balance nearly identical to my own accumulated on almost exactly the same schedule tied to a phone number that wasn't mine. I stared at that email for 11 minutes before I closed the laptop. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know how long. I just knew with the specific sick clarity you get once or twice in a life that I'd opened a message never meant for me and that Mrs. J. Callaway wasn't a typo. If you'd opened that email 12 years of anniversaries suddenly rearranging themselves in your head, would you have called him right then, or waited to see what else surfaced first? Tell me in the comments, because what I actually found once I looked closer changed everything I thought I understood about our marriage. I didn't call him that night. 11 years of managing reservation systems for a living had taught me exactly one lesson above all others. You never present a discrepancy without the full booking history behind it, because a partial record gets explained away by anyone clever enough to know which half is missing. And Julian was very good at that, so I did the one thing I actually knew how to do. I used my professional login, the one I was authorized to use for corporate accounts, to run a guest history report on the Wintergate Inn's booking system, cross-referencing the confirmation numbers against my own 12 years of personal records. What came back stopped me cold. A second Callaway account opened the same month as ours, with a nearly identical booking pattern. Same room 214 whenever available, but staggered 2 weeks apart from our own October stay every single year without exception. 24 anniversary trips total, 12 of them mine. Before I said a word to Julian, his mother Denise called again this time, inviting me to lunch on short notice somewhere we'd never been before. She spent most of the meal asking more directly than usual whether I'd been looking into the hotel account lately and whether my job still gave me access to that kind of thing. I told her business was steady, my records were exactly as thorough as they'd always been, and watched her expression tighten in a way that told me exactly who had asked her to find that out. 2 days later, I told Julian I'd handle this year's anniversary booking myself the way I used to, and that I'd already reserved room 214 for our usual October week. He hesitated exactly 1 second before agreeing the same practiced ease he always used right before a lie. Instead of waiting for October, I drove to the winter gate 2 weeks early on the exact staggered date my report had flagged. The front desk clerk, a young man I didn't recognize, greeted me by a name that wasn't mine. "Welcome back, Mrs. Calloway. Room 214's all set for you and your husband, same as always." I asked as steadily as I could manage who had checked in that reservation. He glanced at his screen, hesitated, and said, "Actually, ma'am, he's already up there. Checked in an hour ago." I climbed the stairs myself. The door to 214 was unlocked. Julian stood by the window seat, arranging a small bouquet on the table, and beside him stood a woman I'd never met, dark-haired, maybe my own age, wearing an expression that shifted from confusion to horror in the span of about 2 seconds as she looked between the two of us. "You're Camille," she said, not a question. "I am," I said, "and you're the other Mrs. Calloway." Her name was Marisol. She'd been married to Julian for 9 years in a small ceremony 2 states away that neither of our families had ever crossed paths that kept entirely separate from the life he built with me by nothing more than distance, careful scheduling, and I would learn a second set of documents filed under a middle name he'd quietly started using with her. I laid my own booking history on the small hotel table next to the loyalty confirmation printout I'd pulled that morning. 12 years of October reservations set beside what I now understood was 12 years of hers, staggered 2 weeks apart like clockwork. My reservation history, her reservation history. 24 anniversaries in the same room, and neither of us had ever once overlapped because he'd built the calendar himself year after year with the same precision I used for a living. "I can explain the room," Julian started. "You don't have to," I said. "I've met Marisol. I've seen both our accounts side by side. I know exactly how long this took to build because building things carefully is what I do for a living, and I recognize the work when I see it." For one full breath, something in his face genuinely broke. Not performance, not deflection, just a man watching 12 years of careful architecture collapse in real time in front of both women who'd trusted it. "I never planned for either of you to find out," he said, quiet. "It started small years apart, and every year it got harder to undo without losing everything. So I just kept building the calendar instead." For that one breath, I almost recognized the man I'd married. Then just as fast, the mask came back up. "This doesn't have to blow up both our lives," he said, looking between us. "We can figure out something that works for everyone." There is no version of works for everyone that includes 2 wives who didn't know about each other, I said. "You didn't build 2 marriages, Julian. You built one very carefully staggered lie and rented the same window seat to sell it twice a year." Marisol, quiet until then, spoke up, her voice shaking but clear. "For what it's worth," she said to me, "I asked him once years ago if there was anyone else. He told me I was being paranoid. I think I believed him because I wanted to." We left the Wintergate separately that same afternoon, each of us filing for divorce within the month, each represented by different attorneys, who we later learned had to coordinate directly with each other, simply to untangle which marriage had technically come first. Denise called me 2 weeks later, not to defend her son, but almost ashamed of her own part in it. "I've known about Marisol for years," she admitted. "I told Julian more than once that a lie this large doesn't stay small forever. I just never thought it was my place to be the one who told either of you. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't close to enough. But it was the first fully honest thing she'd said to me in years, and I could hear underneath it the weight she'd been quietly carrying alongside him." The final piece came a month after the divorce filings from the Wintergate's longtime general manager, a woman named Louise, who'd known us both separately for over a decade. She called simply to apologize for something she hadn't realized mattered until she heard the full story, that Julian had asked her years earlier whether the hotel could guarantee room 214 on 2 specific non-overlapping windows every October, describing it at the time as wanting a reliable tradition for the woman in his life. Singular. He hadn't stumbled into overlapping our anniversaries by accident. He'd engineered the gap himself in advance with the same care I used to track the account he never thought I'd think to check. People keep asking if I regret those 12 Octobers spent in a room I now know was rented out twice a year like clockwork, if I feel foolish for how long a staggered calendar sat hidden inside an account I managed for a living. I don't. I've come to believe that patience isn't the same as blindness, and that sometimes the quietest, most disciplined part of you, the part that just keeps the records tracks, the dates, does the work. Nobody else thinks to check is exactly what ends up holding the proof you didn't know you'd need. I won't tell you it ended clean. Marisol and I still exchange the occasional message, careful and a little unsure of what we're supposed to be to each other. Now 2 women who share more history with the same man than either of us ever wanted to. Some Octobers out of nothing but habit, I still find myself glancing at hotel listings before I remember there's no anniversary left to plan. I've made peace with the parts that never got resolved because I've stopped believing every ending needs to. So tell me, if the very system you managed for a living was the thing that finally caught him, would that feel like justice to you or just a strange kind of grief? If this one hit you the way I think it did, share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe for the next one, because trust me, this isn't even the hardest story I know.